I never imagined that accepting a private nursing job would lead to me inheriting millions of dollars, or being called a manipulative gold digger by an entire family. My name is Elena, and for 18 months, I cared for a dying man who fell in love with me. What his children didn't know was that every moment, every conversation, every transfer of money was part of a plan set in motion long before I ever knocked on Robert Hutchinson's door. Can a young nurse truly fall for an elderly patient, or is it always about the money? And when children suddenly reappear in their father's life, is it love or inheritance that brings them back? These questions haunted me throughout my time with Robert, and by the end, the answers became devastatingly clear, though not in the way anyone expected. I was 28 when the law firm contacted me. They were looking for a registered nurse with a specific skill set, compassionate, professional, and willing to sign the most unusual non-disclosure agreement I'd ever seen. The pay was extraordinary, 3 times my hospital salary, but the job description was vague. Provide end-of-life care for a widowed gentleman, documentation of all interactions required. I should have asked more questions, but I was drowning in student loans and exhausted from double shifts. I signed the contract. Robert Hutchinson lived in a mansion that felt like a mausoleum. At 76, he'd been ravaged by congestive heart failure and diabetes. But it wasn't his failing body that struck me most on that first day. It was the loneliness that hung in every room like dust. Photographs of his late wife, Margaret, covered the walls, her warm smile frozen in time. Photos of his 3 adult children stopped abruptly around their teenage years, as if they'd simply vanished from his life. "You're the 4th nurse this month," Robert said weakly from his bed, his pale blue eyes studying me with a mixture of hope and resignation. The others couldn't tolerate how particular I am. Margaret always said I was difficult. "Then I suppose we'll find out if I'm tougher than the others," I replied with a gentle smile. I had no idea that this simple exchange was the beginning of the most elaborate test of human nature I would ever witness, or that I was both the examiner and the participant. The first 3 months passed quietly. I bathed Robert, managed his medications, prepared his meals according to strict dietary restrictions, and listened to his stories about Margaret. He spoke of her constantly, how they'd built a textile business from nothing, how she'd been the fierce one while he handled numbers, how her laugh could fill an entire room. He never mentioned his children unless I asked directly, and when he did, his answers were brief and tinged with something that felt like disappointment. "They're busy with their own lives," he'd say, staring out the window. "Caroline has her art gallery in Manhattan. David runs some tech startup in San Francisco. And Jessica? Well, Jessica is always traveling, finding herself," she says. In those first months, not one of them called. Not on his birthday, not on the anniversary of Margaret's death. The phone in that vast house remained silent, except for doctors' offices and my weekly reports to the law firm that had hired me. Everything changed the day Robert asked me to help him with his banking. His hands shook too badly to write, and his vision had deteriorated. He needed to pay bills, manage investments, and he trusted no one else. That trust terrified me because I understood what it meant. I called my contact at the law firm before agreeing to anything. "Document everything," the lawyer told me, her voice sharp and professional. "Every transaction, every conversation about money. Keep meticulous records." So I did. Robert added me to his accounts with power of attorney. He insisted, despite my protests. "You're the only one who's here, Elena," he said with a sad smile. "You're the only one who cares if I wake up tomorrow." The words broke my heart because they were true. I transferred funds exactly as Robert instructed. Payments to his physicians, donations to charities Margaret had loved, maintenance for the house. I kept spreadsheets of every penny. But I also watched Robert's affection for me deepen into something more complicated. He began calling me his dear girl. He'd reach for my hand during his bad spells. He started talking about changing his will. That's when I made the first call to his children myself, following the protocol I'd been given. "Your father is declining," I told Caroline, keeping my voice neutral and professional. "You might want to visit." "Who is this?" Caroline's voice was clipped, suspicious. I'm Elena, your father's nurse. A nurse? He never mentioned needing a nurse. We just spoke to him. She paused, and I could hear her calculating. Well, it's been a few months, I suppose. I'll check my schedule. She didn't come. David called back 2 days later, his tone immediately accusatory. My sister says you're managing our father's care now. We weren't informed of this arrangement. Who hired you? Your father's medical team coordinated with... I want to see credentials. I want references. And I want to know exactly what kind of access you have to his personal affairs. The interrogation lasted 20 minutes. I answered every question calmly while Robert slept in the next room, unaware that his son viewed me as a threat rather than expressing concern about his father's health. David promised to look into this situation, but never asked when he could visit or how his father was actually doing. Jessica showed up unannounced 6 weeks later, breezing through the door in expensive yoga attire with a green juice in hand. She found me helping Robert with his physical therapy exercises in the sunroom. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, though her eyes were fixed on me, assessing. "You didn't tell me you had a nurse now, and such a young one." Robert's face lit up at seeing his daughter, but I caught the flicker of hurt that she'd come without warning, without calling first. "Jessica, sweetheart, this is Elena. She takes wonderful care of me." "I'm sure she does." Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes. She stayed for exactly 45 minutes, took several photos with Robert for her social media, and left, promising to return soon. She didn't. But what she did do was call her siblings. Within a week, my phone began ringing constantly. The Hutchinson children had finally taken an interest in their father's life, or more accurately, in who was controlling access to it. The accusations started with emails. Caroline wrote first, her message dripping with barely concealed hostility disguised as concern. She questioned my qualifications, my intentions, and why her father had suddenly needed such intensive care. She copied David and Jessica, creating a united front I suspected had been coordinated over conference calls I wasn't privy to. David followed with a formal letter from his attorney, requesting a full accounting of every financial transaction I'd made on Robert's behalf. The legal language was meant to intimidate, to paint me as someone with something to hide. I forwarded everything to the law firm that had hired me, and they responded with their own legal team, providing every document requested and more. Jessica took a different approach. She started visiting regularly, always with her phone out, always recording. She'd ask Robert leading questions. "Daddy, do you really want Elena handling your money? Don't you think family should do that?" She'd examine every corner of the house, looking for evidence of negligence or impropriety. Her influencer smile plastered on, even as her eyes cataloged everything like an appraiser. Robert grew weaker through it all. His heart was failing faster than anyone had predicted. He could see what his children were doing, and the knowledge that they'd come back for his money rather than for him seemed to accelerate his decline. Some nights, he'd weep quietly while I held his hand. "I thought Margaret was wrong about them," he whispered one evening, his voice barely audible. "She tried to tell me, near the end, that they'd changed, that they only saw dollar signs when they looked at us. I defended them. I said they were just busy, just living their lives." "Don't think about that now," I told him, though my instructions were to let him talk, to document everything. She was protecting me, even from the grave. My brilliant Margaret. He smiled through his tears. She always was the smart one. 3 days before Robert died, all 3 children arrived together with their attorneys. They demanded a family meeting, insisting I leave the room. Robert refused. He made me stay, made me witness as his own children presented him with papers declaring me a manipulator, possibly even a criminal. They had a new care plan, a new financial advisor, and a psychiatric evaluation scheduled to determine if he had the mental capacity to make his own decisions. "You're going to take away the one person who's been here," Robert said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, powered by anger and heartbreak. "The one person who didn't abandon me when your mother died. Elena has shown me more kindness in 18 months than the 3 of you have in the past 5 years. Caroline's face flushed red. "She's manipulated you. She's a stranger who's stolen your affection and your money." My money. Robert laughed, a bitter sound that ended in coughing. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're not here because you love me. You're here because you're terrified you won't inherit what you think you're owed. They left that day in fury, promising legal action. Jessica posted a tearful video about elder abuse and protecting vulnerable seniors, her followers flooding the comments with support. David hired a private investigator to dig into my background. Caroline started calling Adult Protective Services, demanding investigations. Robert had his attorney come to the house the next day. What he did in those final legal meetings, I wasn't privy to. I was instructed to give them privacy. But I saw the sealed envelopes afterward, the satisfaction on Robert's face despite his labored breathing. Margaret would be proud, he told me that night. She knew. She always knew. 2 days later, Robert Hutchinson died peacefully in his sleep. I was holding his hand, reading to him from one of Margaret's favorite poetry books. His last words were "thank you and tell them," though he never finished the sentence. Within hours of his death, all 3 children descended on the house, not to grieve, not to comfort each other, but to secure what they believed was rightfully theirs. They brought movers, appraisers, and their attorneys, ready to divide an estate they'd already spent in their minds. What they didn't bring was tissues for their dry eyes. The will reading was scheduled for 1 week after Robert's funeral. The funeral itself had been a spectacle of performative grief. Caroline sobbing loudly in the front pew while checking her phone, David delivering a eulogy about a father he'd barely spoken to in years, Jessica live-streaming select private moments to her followers. I sat in the back, silent, watching them play their parts. I'd been instructed by the law firm to attend the will reading. The children's attorneys tried to have me barred from the room, arguing I had no legal standing as a mere employee. But Robert's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd known the Hutchinson family for 30 years, insisted I stay. "Miss Torres has every right to be present," Mrs. Chen said firmly, gesturing for me to sit. "You'll understand why shortly." The conference room was tense. Caroline sat with her arms crossed, radiating hostility. David kept whispering to his lawyer, occasionally shooting me venomous glares. Jessica was the only one who attempted civility, offering me a tight smile that looked more like a warning. Mrs. Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we discuss Robert Hutchinson's will, we need to address a prior document. One written by Margaret Hutchinson before her death 3 years ago." "What does my mother's will have to do with anything?" Caroline interrupted. "That was settled years ago. This isn't her will. This is a letter of intent, sealed and notarized, to be opened only after Robert's death, and only in the presence of specific individuals." Mrs. Chen looked directly at me. "Including Miss Elena Torres." The room went silent. I felt 3 pairs of eyes boring into me, trying to understand what possible connection I could have to their dead mother. Mrs. Chen broke the seal on an ivory envelope, the paper thick and expensive, Margaret's signature style. She pulled out several pages of handwritten letters, Margaret's elegant script filling each page. When she began reading, her voice was steady and clear. "To my children, Caroline, David, and Jessica, if you are hearing this letter, it means my beloved Robert has passed, and the test I designed has reached its conclusion." Test. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Mrs. Chen continued, "I am writing this in the final weeks of my life, with full mental clarity, as verified by 3 independent physicians whose statements are attached. I know my time is short, but I cannot leave Robert alone in this world without ensuring he is protected from what you 3 have become." Caroline stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. My mother would never—" "Sit down, Mrs. Morrison, or I'll have you removed." Mrs. Chen's voice was ice. Caroline sat, her face pale. The letter detailed everything. How Margaret had watched her children transform over the years, from loving kids into adults who viewed their parents as banks rather than people. How they'd stopped visiting unless they needed money for a business venture, a divorce settlement, or another failed project. How they'd forgotten birthdays and anniversaries, how their phone calls became transactional rather than affectionate. I tried to talk to Robert about this, the letter read, but he couldn't see it. He made excuses for each of you, defended your absences, convinced himself you were simply busy. So I took matters into my own hands. I hired a law firm to execute a plan that would begin after my death. A plan to test whether you would return to your father out of love or out of greed. My hands were shaking. I knew I was part of something orchestrated, but I hadn't known the full extent. I hired Miss Elena Torres through a private nursing agency, Mrs. Chen read on. She was selected for her credentials, her character, and her willingness to document everything while providing genuine care to Robert. She was instructed to give Robert access to her accounts and power of attorney as his condition worsened. She was told to contact each of you when his health declined. Everything she has done has been under my instructions, executed by the law firm I retained for this purpose. David's face had gone from red to white. Jessica was crying, real tears this time. Caroline looked like she might be sick. The question I needed answered was simple, the letter continued. Would you come back for your father, or would you come back for his fortune? Mrs. Chen paused, allowing Margaret's words to sink in before continuing. Elena was instructed to keep detailed records of every interaction with each of you. Every phone call, every visit, every word spoken. The results of this test would determine the distribution of Robert's estate, as per the legal arrangements I made before my death. The lawyer pulled out 3 thick folders, each labeled with one of the children's names. She opened Caroline's first, reading selected excerpts aloud. Dates and times when Elena had called about Robert's declining health, met with voicemails that were never returned. Text messages about his birthday that went unanswered. Then, the sudden flurry of communication the moment Caroline learned about the power of attorney, 11 calls in one day, none of them asking about Robert's actual condition. David's folder was even more damning. Private investigator reports he'd commissioned to dig up dirt on me. Emails to attorneys discussing how to have Robert declared incompetent. A recorded phone call where he discussed the investment potential of his father's estate with a financial advisor before Robert had even died. Jessica's social media analytics were printed out in color, the posts about her father that only appeared after she learned about the money, each one carefully crafted to build a narrative of a devoted daughter being kept from her ailing father by a predatory nurse. The timestamps showed she'd been in Bali on a yoga retreat when Elena had called about Robert's hospitalization, yet she'd posted a throwback photo with the caption, "Missing my daddy today," for the sympathy and engagement. None of you asked how he was eating, Mrs. Chen read from Margaret's letter. None of you asked if he was in pain, if he was sleeping, if he was afraid. Caroline, you asked about the house's appraisal value. David, you asked about stock portfolios and liquid assets. Jessica, you asked if Elena had gotten him to change his will yet, as if that was an inevitability rather than an insult. Caroline was openly weeping now, but there was anger mixed with her shame. This isn't fair. You can't judge us like this. We had lives, responsibilities. I had a life too, I said quietly, speaking for the first time. My voice shook but held steady. I had a career at a hospital where I was needed. I had friends, relationships, my own dreams. But I showed up every single day for 18 months because your father needed someone, and because your mother trusted me to give him the dignity and love he deserved in his final years. Mrs. Chen nodded and continued reading. If my children have proven themselves worthy, if they have shown genuine love and concern for Robert's well-being rather than his wealth, then this letter becomes merely a cautionary tale, and his estate will be divided among them as originally planned. But if they have proven what I feared in my heart, then the alternative arrangements will take effect. The room was silent, except for Jessica's quiet sobbing. Robert changed his will 3 days before his death, Mrs. Chen said, setting down Margaret's letter and picking up a legal document. In sound mind and witnessed by 3 independent parties, as required by law. He left each of his children a sum of $50,000, enough to prove he hadn't forgotten them, but a fraction of his $38 million estate. Caroline gasped. David's lawyer was already shaking his head, preparing arguments for a contest. The remainder of the estate goes to Miss Elena Torres with specific legal stipulations. Mrs. Chen turned to me, her expression softening slightly. You are to establish the Margaret and Robert Hutchinson Foundation for Elder Care, focused on providing support for isolated seniors whose families have abandoned them. You will serve as director with an annual salary, but the bulk of the money must be used for this charitable purpose. The foundation's work will be the legacy Margaret wanted and the punishment she designed. I couldn't breathe. $38 million. Not for me, not really, but a responsibility that would consume the rest of my life. This is insane, David shouted, standing abruptly. We'll contest this. No court will uphold such a vindictive, manipulative. Every document has been reviewed by judges in 3 states, Mrs. Chen interrupted. Margaret Hutchinson spent 2 years ensuring this would be legally unbreakable. You're welcome to try, but you'll spend your $50,000 on legal fees and lose. I looked at the 3 of them, these broken, angry people who'd gambled on greed and lost everything. Part of me felt sorry for them. But a larger part remembered Robert's face when they'd accused me of manipulation, remembered the nights he'd cried because his children only called when they wanted something. Your mother loved you, I said softly. She loved you enough to hope you'd prove her wrong. Your father loved you enough to give you chance after chance to show up. I'm sorry you couldn't see that until it was too late. I left the conference room with my life forever changed, carrying the weight of Margaret's trust and Robert's final gratitude. Behind me, the Hutchinson children sat in the wreckage of their own making, inheriting exactly what their choices had earned them. Nothing but regret. If this story moved you, imagine the incredible journeys still waiting to be told. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss these powerful tales of justice, redemption, and the unexpected turns life takes. Your support helps us bring these emotional stories to life, stories that remind us what truly matters in the end.